We have a former president who, despite facing more than 90 criminal charges, wants to be elected again. And there are millions of his MAGA supporters who would do about anything to make that happen. But who are these MAGA people? How are they a threat? Stay with us.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people. Some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Joining us today on the Lean to the Left podcast is Russell Jack, who worked for more than 2 decades as a federal air marshal and who's written a new book, Is MAGA a Terrorist Movement? Russell says that from 2016 to 2022, he saw MAGA operating freely inside the U.S. government, both as agents and management. Now, what the hell is that all about? We're about to find out. Hey, Russell, welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast, buddy.
Thanks, Bob. Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Tell us about your career in government, Russell. You were a federal air marshal, a federal police officer, a member of the National Guard military police, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So my last 20 years, the federal government was with the Federal Air Marshal Service. Prior to that, I had 5 years as a federal police officer with 2 different agencies. And before that, when I was 18, I enlisted in the Army National Guard as a military policeman and was deployed for Operation Desert Storm. Okay. And after I got back from that, I went through officer candidate school, got my commission, and led a platoon for about a year. So in total, I had about 5 years with the National Guard, 5 years as federal police, and then 20 years as an agent.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a career. Tell us what you saw as a federal air marshal in terms of the MAGA people working within the government.
One of the things I want to point out with that is one of the concepts I talk about in my book is tribalism. In both law enforcement and the military, I can only really speak about the MAGA influence on the law enforcement side because of how long I've been out from the military. But with tribalism, it's not just being loyal like you would be with your family or friends. It's overly loyal, excessively loyal, that tribalism is. So the problem we have is starting in 2016, going back a little bit, in that profession of law enforcement and the military, we have to have each other's back. So there's a very strong bond, more so than with some professions. So because we have to have each other's back, we're not just a group of individuals. We operate as a team. So tribalism can become a big issue on that. And what happened is in 2016 to 2022, when I was working as an air marshal, they went from being quiet to saying the quiet part out loud. It went from quietly thinking these things to being empowered and emboldened to talk about them more. So the MAGA culture has co-opted and taken over the federal government as far as law enforcement. And some of the things I've seen on that is like symbolism like the QAnon or Punisher. QAnon is like an extreme version of MAGA. And then the Punisher symbol is interesting. It's a Punisher skull. It's based off the comic book. A lot of people in the military, like special forces, would wear that. And it wasn't inappropriate for them, because what that symbolized was that doing right and doing good meant going outside the law. So for them, maybe that could be considered appropriate. But when law enforcement started wearing it, I questioned my fellow law enforcement officers. I'm like, why are you wearing a Punisher skull? And they're like, what's MAGA? And I'm like, you do realize that is saying that it's okay to act outside the law as a law enforcement officer. And so that was an interesting topic. The other thing I noticed too was, as far as I'm working in the government, is they adopted the right-wing viewpoints of MAGA, the bathroom bill against transgenders, climate change denial. And how that works is it ties in with the election denial. There's an enormous amount of information out there refuting the deniers of climate change or the deniers of the election. But the problem that we're running into is they only listen to right-wing media sources. So they would watch Fox News on TV and they would listen to radio broadcasts that were right-wing. And when you questioned them or said, hey, that's not correct, they said, what's your sources? And as soon as you cited a source outside of their specific media, they immediately said that's not a valid source. They called CNN the Clinton News Network, to give you an example. So one of the problems we're having with that is them acting on it. So what I noticed is there started to become incidents like intimidation of LGBT community, and also just following a lot of the things that were happening with, for lack of a better word, the takeover of the government. So it's very concerning that many people in law enforcement, especially my agency, were openly okay with MAGA, which, as we'll discuss later, does a lot of illegal activity, which as a police officer, you would think, hey, a guy who has over 90 criminal indictments against him allegedly could be a criminal. And why would law enforcement support someone like that? Anyone else, if it was a Democrat with 90 plus charges, I'm pretty sure they'd say something negative.
Yeah, pretty sure. Why do you think it is, though, that they bought into this MAGA stuff?
Going back to that tribalism, the problem is what I noticed when I worked in the field office, especially after 2016 and on, is there was a very strong culture that was already there leaning towards the right that was more anti-liberal. That was even before MAGA came into power. So you have a culture that's already leans to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And once MAGA came along, they're like, hey, this really embodies what we're looking for. So they started really espousing it. They started with verbal attacks against liberals and things like that. And the other issue is because other agents in law enforcement wanted to fit in, they would just keep quiet. So there was a significant size group that was with MAGA, another significant size group that didn't want to be excommunicated from the tribe because they didn't want to get into arguments with their fellow workers. And then you had a small number, agents such as myself, that were saying, hey, no, what you're thinking is wrong, and you shouldn't do that. Not only as a federal employee, but as a law enforcement officer. You can't say things like, let's go Brandon, which is a euphemism for F. Joe Biden, when he's the president. They were saying things like that on duty while he was president. And I'm like, that's your boss. You can't be doing that kind of thing. So the problem we have is that they've co-opted themselves into the federal government. Not only that, but also too, from what I've heard and seen, military and higher levels of government.
Is this dangerous, do you think?
Yeah, very much. The reason why is there's a difference between morality enforcement and law enforcement. I was looking at one of the things that happened in Iran, where a woman who wasn't wearing her hijab correctly, which is a face covering, very strict Islamic law, she was killed. And allegedly, I could say murdered. They said she died of a heart attack, and I think she was in her early 20s. So real common to die in your early 20s of a heart attack. But the problem is that the legal law for law enforcement is the same as morality enforcement. So the problem is once they pass these into law, then that morality enforcement can become law enforcement and they legally can do it. So my concern is if you already have a culture of law enforcement officers who support MAGA, what's going to happen if MAGA takes over and they start passing these laws? If they get a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate and they have a president, the only thing that's going to stop them is the Supreme Court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority. Yeah, so if that happens and they pass these laws, how much resistance do you think the law enforcement officers are going to have who are pro-MAGA to enforce these things that are against our current Constitution?
That's a very good question. So therefore, you say that the MAGA is a threat to our democracy, right?
That's correct.
What freedoms do you think they want to take away?
I think the biggest thing is that they want to control the government and get a strong president at the top. And that's where the word fascism gets thrown around because it's pretty accurate. So once they get that one party rule and control, that's the threat to democracy, like we talked about, them having a 2/3 majority in Congress and then having a president. Then they can add amendments and they can take amendments away without any voter having a single input because we have a representative democracy. So we vote in people that we hope are going to do what we want. But the problem is once they have that majority, Congress can pass the laws and then they can be enforced. On that note, with that 2/3 majority, once they pass that, then they'll have complete control of the government. Then they can pass these laws that then people have to go out and do.
What type of laws are you talking about that you're worried about?
So, for example, the freedom of the press.
Okay.
Freedom of the press in 2019, Donald Trump said in a tweet, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't want to say the exact quote, but he said that the free press is the enemy of the people. Okay, so this is the president of the United States saying that the United States government, because he represents it, the executive branch, is against the freedom of the press. And the reason they do that is they want to control the narrative. Okay, this is the same thing we've seen in other autocratic rule countries. If you look at China, okay, you look at what happened back in World War II with Germany. By controlling the narrative, they can now say, hey, it's illegal for you to say what we don't want you to say. And then you can only listen to the state-run media, which at that point will be MAGA. It'll be the right-wing news media.
Okay.
So that's the First Amendment. And also, too, like we talked about, some of the LGBTQ laws and things like that are religious based. The reason they're passing them isn't because they feel that they're a threat to them physically, it's because they don't want them around. So by passing these laws against individuals and individual groups, and then also trying to push forward an extreme version of Christianity in the coattails along with the MAGA movement, they're violating the First Amendment.
They sure are. You say MAGA's a terrorist movement. Terrorism. Really?
Terrorism is basically, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is using coercion, intimidation, violence, force to illegally using those methods to achieve political goals, especially if it's done against a civilian population. So when you look at the parameters of terrorism, it becomes pretty clear that a lot of the activities that have happened January 6th, where they violated the 12th Amendment. 12th Amendment is ratification of our votes. And by them stopping that, because the vote was stopped, they violated the 12th Amendment. That's January 6th was violent. They injured over 100 police officers. They killed police officers. And then there's many other examples also too. Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, being attacked with a hammer. The man fractured his skull. The surrounding of the Biden bus. Here's an example of a civilian intimidation. So they surrounded that to intimidate them. And that's terrorism. The Let's Go Brandon comment. What that was is there was a NASCAR race and the reporter hearing it misheard them saying F Joe Biden. I'm sure you can fill in the F part. And that's a euphemism for the Let's Go Brandon is a euphemism for F Joe Biden. So that is also intimidation. The purpose to that is to cow liberals or non-MAGA people into silence. And then we go into that further on that. You have the death threats. Death threats have happened to election officials. They've happened to Democratic members of Congress. They've happened to people who are involved in prosecution of Donald Trump. So those are all examples of how they are a terrorist movement.
What actions do you think could be taken to counteract MAGA?
To counteract MAGA, I think the best way to counteract them is voting. Plans. Unfortunately, as I discussed in my book, you should never tell anyone how to vote. I'm not telling you how to vote if you're listening right now, but I want you to know how important that vote is and what it represents. So my problem is not, the title of my book is not, we should all be Democrats or Republicans suck or anything like that.
Right.
But my concern is that a vote for Republicans, we're in a two-party system. We've been forced into a two-party system in America. You either vote Democrat or you vote Republican, or you throw your vote away, basically. Third-party votes usually just take away from a Democrat or Republican. They don't actually win. With this two-party system, if Donald Trump is the choice for president for them, if he's their nominee, if that occurs, and he's in the lead to get that, we can all see that. If that happens, Trump is Trump. And a vote for any Republican at that point will be a vote for MAGA and Trump. So the problem is, even if you have a Republican candidate that you like, that isn't president, but just a Republican candidate you like, the problem is by voting that person in, you're giving more power to the Republican Party, which is now the MAGA party. So you're supporting, in pretty much directly, you're supporting a terroristic movement, in my opinion. So
why did you decide to write the book? It's a big undertaking.
It is. And to be honest with you, when I first wrote it, I didn't intend to become a writer or an author. I wrote it as a catharsis. I was very frustrated over the last 6 years. I spent working with people who were in the MAGA movement and who ostracized anyone who spoke against them, to include myself. So it was a very hostile work environment to work those last 6 years. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, as far as stuff you can't handle, but it has an effect on me. I've basically done my entire career, my entire adult life has been defending people and their freedoms, Americans defending their freedoms, not overseas as a soldier and here in law enforcement. And my biggest concern with that is the need to vote them out is so critical because the nature of what they're doing is unpatriotic. So the ways we can counteract it is by voting against them. And then also, too, if you see them doing something illegal, that needs to be reported. We need to call the police on it. We need to film them from a safe distance, of course, and report that. And if the law enforcement officers aren't doing their job, either malfeasance, misfeasance, or nonfeasance, either deliberately doing wrong, not doing as well as they're trained, or just not getting involved, that's a criminal thing. That's something where they have to get involved legally. They have to protect every citizen. So if they're doing that, go ahead and hold them accountable. Go ahead and film them from a safe distance and then report it to their higher ups. If that doesn't work, you can always send it up to social media. The big advantage we have now is don't be silent. Unlike back in the 50s and 60s, people could get away with murder. some cases literally. Now, almost everybody has a cell phone with a camera on it, and you can live link to social media. So I'm all for holding people accountable. Our government officials, our law enforcement officers, our military should all be held accountable.
Okay.
So report to law enforcement and don't be silent. And let's take back our flag. Call them out. The term deplorables, I don't know if you really like using that term or not, but the important thing is their action is deplorable. You don't want to have a group of people who openly are in violation of the Constitution.
Exactly. So you believe Trump is a danger to our freedoms, I gather.
Yeah, I definitely do. The reason it's such a danger is what happened in the past with other autocrats is they weren't taken seriously. And then they got a movement behind them through a cult of personality. And then eventually that movement started to gain traction and gain power. And we've seen that. 74 million plus people voted for Donald Trump. It was a record. The only reason he didn't get the presidency is because it was also a record with the 81 million that Joe Biden got. Right. So it's a good thing that people realize the threat. But my goal with the book, with the website, and with these podcasts is to let people know, hey, this is a really serious threat, and you need to get out there and vote. You need to hold them accountable for their illegal actions and report them to the police. And if necessary, you need to upload things to social media, and don't be silent. If they're espousing hate and bigotry, say something. Don't just let it happen. We wouldn't do that if somebody was walking around wearing a white rose and a Klansman or wearing a Nazi uniform with a swastika. We should treat them the same way.
Do you think Trump really wants to be a dictator?
I do. And I don't think he cares about necessarily using that term. Again, this is my opinion. But the reality of the MAGA movement, the reason why it falls into the fascist side of the camp is the idea behind that, and I'm paraphrasing the fascism, is to have a control by one party and to have a very strong person at the top, a dictator. Okay. Right. Or in this case, could just be a very strong president. But the reality is if you have a very strong president and you have control of Congress, you're very quickly going to have effectively a dictatorship. So I think it's a very real threat. If we don't show up to vote, they're going to. MAGA will be there. Okay. Yeah. They're very gung-ho in supporting their leader. So they will vote. So we need to make sure we get out there and vote, and we need to do what we can to make sure that they don't cow others into silence.
What's your prediction about Trump's effort to regain the presidency?
As of right now, I don't think he'll win. We had 81 million people show up last time versus the 74. I think their ability to get new MAGA adherents versus our ability to get the word out and get people to vote that maybe aren't already is going to add to our numbers more than it'll add to theirs. I think there's a very real chance that we'll be able to stop him. But part of the reason for this discussion and the book and the website is all of us together who are pushing for this message can get people out there to vote, can get people out there to say, hey, what you're doing is illegal. I'm calling the police. And to not be silent and call them out when they're doing activities they shouldn't be doing.
Okay, so first of all, your book comes out when?
So my book is scheduled to come out in March.
Okay. And people will be able to find it where? Amazon and other places?
Yeah, so it'll be available by print on demand or ebook. Okay. And after it comes out, we're going to work on making an audiobook as well for people who like to listen on the radio.
Okay.
And go ahead.
How can people reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
So my website, magaterrorism.com, it should be online no later than March 1st. So I encourage people to go to that website. It'll have a link to the book, and I'll update the release date on the book as soon as it comes out. Okay. And there'll be lots of information on there. And over time, as things come along, I will add to that so that there's more and more to see on it over time.
Excellent. Okay, Russell, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, Bob, I really appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about this important topic. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It is an important topic, and I hope you guys pick up his book when it's available and check out his website. So thank you very much, Russell.
Thank you, Bob.
Hey, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page. And the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at Lean to the Left 1, TikTok at Lean to the Left, LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy, and YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.